The unexpected encounter. The space station hung in the silence of the deep, dark void of space, a speck of human creation in the vastness of the galaxy. The hum of the station's engines was a steady backdrop to the quiet. Inside, the human walked down a long metallic corridor, lost in thought. He was a maintenance worker, an ordinary man sent to fix a few systems on this forgotten outpost. The work was simple, dull, and nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary. But today, something felt different. As he moved through the quiet halls, a strange sound caught his attention. It wasn't the usual hum of machinery or the soft echoes of other crew members. No, this was something else, something unusual, almost electric. His eyes narrowed, and he followed the sound, the hair on the back of his neck standing up. He reached a massive window at the end of the hallway, looking out into space. The station's lights flickered for a second, casting eerie shadows across the floor. Then it happened. A blinding flash of light appeared in the distance, growing brighter and larger by the second. The human's breath caught in his throat as he stepped closer to the window. At first, he thought it was a passing asteroid or a spaceship, but this was different. This wasn't natural. The flash exploded, and a large, sleek alien ship appeared out of nowhere, as if it had materialized from thin air. The ship was unlike anything the human had ever seen. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting the stars in every direction. The ship didn't make a sound as it moved closer to the station, its presence so powerful that it seemed to warp the very air around it. For a moment, everything froze. The human stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at the strange vessel. His heart raced, and 1,000 thoughts flooded his mind, but none of them made sense. Was this some kind of advanced human technology? No, he was sure of it. This was alien, and it was heading straight for them. Before he could react, the ship stopped. It hovered just outside the station's docking bay, like a giant bird pausing before landing. The lights on the ship dimmed, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft hum filled the air, and a hatch opened on the side of the ship. The human's pulse quickened. He couldn't look away, his curiosity overpowering any sense of fear he might have felt. What was this? Who, or what, was inside? Then, to his astonishment, a figure appeared in the open hatchway. The human's breath caught in his throat. It was a woman. No, not just any woman. This was no ordinary human. She was tall and graceful, her features elegant and refined, but also otherworldly. Her skin shimmered with a faint glow, like starlight itself had been woven into her very being. She wore a royal-looking outfit, a flowing gown that seemed to float around her like it was made of light. Her hair was a silver blonde cascade, tied up in an intricate style that suggested her high status. The human could hardly believe his eyes. Who was this? And what was she doing here? The woman stepped down from the ship, her movements smooth and confident. As she walked toward him, he instinctively took a step back. Her gaze locked onto him, and there was no mistaking the authority in her eyes. She wasn't just anyone. She was someone important. And then, without any warning, she spoke. "You're marrying me, human." The words hit him like a shockwave. He blinked, convinced he hadn't heard right. Marrying her? What was she talking about? His mind raced, but the confusion didn't last long. She wasn't joking. Her tone was firm, without a hint of humor. She stood tall, her posture regal, as though she were making a declaration of absolute truth. The human opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He couldn't even comprehend what she had said. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe this was all just a part of some bizarre test. But the woman's unwavering stare made him doubt that idea. "What do you mean?" he finally managed to ask, his voice shaky. "Why me? I'm just a maintenance worker." The woman didn't answer at first. Instead, she took a step closer, her gaze never leaving his. The air around them seemed to thrum with some kind of energy, a strange pressure that made him feel both terrified and mesmerized at the same time. "I am Princess Silara of the Corin star system," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "I have come to this world seeking a mate. You, human, are the one chosen." The human's mind was spinning. A princess. A mate? This couldn't be real. He was just an ordinary person with no connection to royalty, no ties to anything beyond his simple life. He glanced around, as if expecting someone to come out and tell him this was all a dream. But no one appeared. There was only the princess, standing in front of him, her presence overwhelming everything else. "I don't understand," he muttered, still trying to grasp what was happening. "I'm not from your world. I'm just—" "You are perfect," the princess interrupted, her eyes glinting with certainty. "You are the one who will save my people, and we will marry." Her words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. The human felt his heart race, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from confusion, curiosity, and something else, something he couldn't quite place. What had he gotten himself into? And why did he feel like the world was about to change forever? Confusion and resistance. The human stood frozen, his mind a swirl of disbelief. His feet felt rooted to the ground, as if the words she had spoken were so absurd that they had taken on a physical form, binding him in place. "You're marrying me, human." The words echoed in his head like a distorted chant over and over. His heart hammered in his chest, unsure if it was fear, excitement, or confusion. He glanced at the alien princess, her regal presence commanding the space around them. She stood with absolute confidence, her silver blonde hair gently swaying in the artificial breeze of the station. The glow of her skin seemed to flicker like starlight, making her seem almost ethereal, untouchable. But her eyes, those piercing eyes, held a kind of certainty that left no room for negotiation. "Wait, hold on," the human said, his voice shaky but desperate. He took a small step back, his mind racing for any kind of logical explanation. You can't just say something like that. I'm not even from your planet. Why me?" The princess didn't flinch. Instead, she took a single graceful step forward, her eyes never leaving his. "You are the one chosen. The stars have aligned for this moment. You, human, have been selected to marry me. Your species is the key to saving my people." The human blinked in confusion, 1,000 thoughts colliding in his head. "What are you talking about? I'm just a regular guy. I fix things. That's all I do. I'm not some, I don't know, prince or warrior. I'm nothing special." Her eyes softened, though her voice remained firm. "You underestimate yourself. The fate of my planet rests in your hands. You are not just any human. You have the potential to unlock something greater than you can imagine." The human's mind spun. This was insane. He had been pulled into something he couldn't even begin to understand. Marriage. A royal union with an alien princess. It felt like a dream. No, a nightmare. He could feel the weight of her words pressing on him, but his instincts screamed at him to run. This was madness. There had to be a mistake. He wasn't the right person for this. "No," the human shook his head, his voice becoming more urgent. "This can't be real. I don't even know who you are. What if you're lying? What if this is some kind of trick?" The princess gaze hardened, and for a brief moment, the air around them seemed to crackle with tension. "Lying," she repeated, her voice cold now. "I do not lie, human. I am the heir to the Corin throne. My people are dying, and I have come to you because you are the one we need. If you refuse me now, the consequences will be far worse than you can imagine." The human felt a chill crawl up his spine. Her words were heavy, and they carried a weight he couldn't ignore. He wanted to argue, to push back harder, but something in her eyes made him hesitate. Was it fear, or something deeper? He didn't know, but he couldn't deny the unsettling truth behind her words. The world outside the station suddenly seemed distant and unreal, as if he were being pulled into another universe entirely. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. How could he refuse? How could he walk away from something so strange, so powerful? But on the other hand, how could he accept it? He wasn't prepared for this. His life was nothing like what she was describing. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man doing his job. The princess took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Her gaze softened again, but there was still an undeniable force in her presence. You do not have to understand everything right now. All I ask is that you trust me. In time, you will see why this is the only way. You will see why you are the key to saving my world. The human took a deep breath, his mind torn between the weight of her words and the overpowering desire to run as far away from this as possible. But he couldn't deny it. Something inside him, some deep, unexplainable force, told him that this wasn't just a random encounter. This was bigger than him. I'm not a hero, he whispered, more to himself than to her. The princess smiled faintly. Perhaps not yet, but you will be. A silence fell between them. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't peaceful. It was filled with tension, a tug-of-war between resistance and the pull of destiny. The human stood there, still unsure of what to do next. This wasn't just about an alien princess or a royal marriage. This was about something much bigger. The weight of the choice pressed on him more heavily with each passing second. "Marry me, human," she said, her voice low but powerful, "and help me save us all." His world, it seemed, was about to change forever. The princess's mission. The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity. The human stood there, torn between the rational part of his mind screaming for him to run and the strange pull of the princess's presence that seemed to reach deep into his soul. Her gaze never wavered. She was calm, composed, her purpose clear. But to him, it felt like a waking dream. Nothing made sense. Why me? He finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. What makes me so important? You're a princess. Surely there's someone else, someone who can help you. Why do you need a human like me? The princess didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a step back, and with a subtle movement, she gestured for him to follow her. Without waiting for his response, she turned and walked toward the open hatch of her ship. The human hesitated but followed her, unsure of what else to do. His mind was still reeling from the shock of her words. As they entered the ship, the environment shifted. The interior was unlike anything the human had ever seen. The walls shimmered with soft light, pulsating in waves, as if the very ship itself was alive. The air felt charged with energy, and the hum of the engines beneath his feet gave off a strange, calming vibration. He could feel the alien technology all around him, and yet it didn't feel threatening. It felt ancient, powerful. The princess led him down a narrow corridor into a spacious chamber. At the far end of the room was a large crystalline structure, glowing with a faint otherworldly light. The human couldn't take his eyes off of it. It was mesmerizing, but also eerie, like something he wasn't meant to understand. That, the princess said, her voice quiet but serious, is the heart of my planet's survival. She gestured to the glowing crystal, and for the first time, the human could see the weight of the situation in her eyes. She was no longer just an alien princess. She was a leader, carrying the burden of her people's fate. Our planet, Corin, is dying, she continued. Our sun is unstable, and the radiation is slowly destroying the environment. In time, our world will be uninhabitable. But there is a solution, a way to save us all, and it lies within you. The human blinked, trying to make sense of her words. What do you mean, it lies within me? I'm just a guy. I can't save your planet. The princess turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. The prophecy is clear. Only a human can activate the Heartstone, this crystal. using a power that comes from your species. The energy within the stone can stabilize our sun, but it requires a specific bond, a connection between a human and a Koran royal. That bond can only be formed through marriage. The human's mind struggled to keep up. A bond, a prophecy. He had heard of legends and prophecies, but this sounded like something out of a sci-fi novel, not something he was prepared to deal with. "I don't understand," he said, his voice shaking. "You're telling me that by marrying you, I can save your planet. But how? I don't have any special abilities. I'm not some kind of superhuman." The princess sighed, her eyes softening as she took a step closer. "You're right. You don't have superhuman strength or alien abilities. But humans possess something unique. Your species has the ability to unlock dormant energy in our heartstone. The bond between us, the marriage, is a catalyst. It's the only way to activate the energy stored within." She paused, letting her words sink in. "My people have tried everything. Science, technology, even ancient rituals. Nothing worked. But the prophecy has always said that a human must marry a Koran royal to awaken the stone's power. It is not just a marriage of love or tradition. It is a marriage of destiny." The human's mind raced. This was too much to process. The idea that his mere presence, his being, could save an entire planet seemed impossible. And yet there was something in the princess's eyes, a desperation mingled with hope, that made him pause. She wasn't lying. She believed this with every fiber of her being. "Why me, though?" he asked again. "Why not someone else? Why is it me who has to marry you?" The princess took a deep breath, her gaze softening. "Because you were chosen. The stars have aligned. You are the one who will make this possible, whether you believe it or not. The universe has its own way of selecting those who will change the course of history." The human's heart began to race again. He couldn't explain it, but he could feel the weight of her words, the enormity of the task ahead. This wasn't just some wild dream. It was real, and whether he liked it or not, his life had just taken a turn into the unknown. "Your world is dying," he said slowly, trying to accept the gravity of the situation. "And if I marry you, I can help save it." The princess nodded, her expression solemn but unwavering. "Yes, you can. But time is running out. If we don't act soon, it will be too late." The human stared at her for a moment, the crystal in the center of the room pulsing faintly, as if echoing the urgency in her words. His head was spinning. There were so many questions he wanted to ask, but one thought kept rising above the rest. Could he really do this? Could he accept this strange fate? But before he could voice his doubts, the princess spoke again, her voice a soft whisper, but one that carried the weight of a universe's fate. "We don't have much time, human. You have a choice to make. Will you help me save my people? Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air, heavy with destiny, and for the first time in his life, the human realized that the choice before him was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Struggle between duty and desire. The weight of the princess's words lingered in the air like a storm about to break. The human stood motionless, his mind caught between two worlds. On one side, there was the promise of adventure, of saving an entire planet, of becoming something greater than he ever imagined. On the other side, there was everything he knew, his quiet life, his simple job, and the freedom to make his own choices. "Why do you keep calling me human?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, breaking the silence. "Why not use my name? Does it even matter to you who I am, what I am?" The princess's gaze softened for a brief moment. She seemed to weigh his question carefully before answering. "It does matter," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "But you must understand that I am not asking for a simple marriage. This is not a romantic gesture. This is a union of fate, of necessity. Your name, your identity, it is part of the bond, but it is not the reason I've come." The human felt a twinge in his chest at her words. They stung, but at the same time, There was something oddly comforting about the way she spoke. It wasn't the detached coldness he expected from a royal. There was something real, something personal in her eyes. Yet that same reality made the situation even harder to process. "Then why do I feel like I'm the one being pulled in two directions?" he asked, more to himself than to her. His voice was thick with frustration. "On one hand, you're telling me that the fate of your planet rests in my hands. On the other, all I want is to walk away from all of this, to be free of this weight." The princess stepped closer to him, her eyes never leaving his. Her presence was so magnetic, so powerful, that for a moment he almost forgot how to breathe. "I don't want you to feel trapped, human. I want you to choose this because you believe in it, because you want to help us, not because you feel forced." But those words, spoken with such quiet sincerity, didn't make things any easier. In fact, they only made him more conflicted. Was he truly the one to make this decision? Could he really turn his back on everything he knew, everything he had worked for, and take this giant leap into an unknown future? "Do you think I want this?" the human said, shaking his head. "I'm not a hero. I'm not the kind of person who gets swept up into some galactic mission. I fix things. I stay out of trouble. But now you're asking me to marry you, to tie my life to yours. You don't even know me." The princess's expression didn't change. She stood tall, unwavering, as though she had already seen the struggle within him long before it ever started. "I don't need to know everything about you, human. What I need is for you to believe in the cause, to trust that this union, this bond, will bring us salvation. You have more strength inside you than you realize." Her words stirred something deep inside the human, something he couldn't quite explain. He had lived a quiet life, avoiding conflict, preferring the simplicity of his routine. But now, standing here in the presence of an alien princess, he realized that his life had always been smaller than it could have been. His choices, his actions, none of it had ever seemed to matter much. Now, for the first time, he was being asked to make a decision that could change everything. The princess's hand reached out, almost hesitantly, as though testing the waters of their strange, new connection. She placed it on his arm, and despite the alien nature of the touch, something about it felt right. Her touch, though gentle, carried with it a strange, unspoken weight. It was a simple gesture, yet it spoke volumes of the trust she was placing in him. "You don't have to decide right now," she said softly. "But remember this. You are more than just a man from Earth. You are the key to my people's future. You have the power to shape not just our destiny, but the future of an entire galaxy." The human closed his eyes for a moment, fighting against the pull of her words, the weight of her gaze. His mind screamed at him to walk away, to find a way out, to return to the safety of the life he knew. But then, just as quickly, something else rose within him, a sense of duty, a call to something larger than himself. "You're asking me to give up everything," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "But what if I'm not strong enough? What if I fail? What if I can't do what you're asking?" The princess looked at him with a mixture of understanding and determination. No one knows what they are capable of until they are tested. But this is your moment, human. You can run, or you can rise to meet your destiny. And I believe you will rise. Her words hit him harder than he expected. They weren't just words of encouragement. They were a challenge to see beyond his fears, beyond his doubts, and to realize that he had the power to change everything. The human turned away, his mind racing. The choice was so much bigger than he had ever imagined. He wasn't just being asked to marry an alien princess. He was being asked to decide the future of an entire species, an entire planet. For a moment, he wished he could walk away, disappear, and return to the life he had known. But something in him, a small spark of courage, began to grow. Maybe he wasn't just a maintenance worker. Maybe he was more than that. He took a deep breath, then turned back to face her. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted, his voice quiet but steady. "But I'll try. I'll do what I can, For you. For your people." The princess's eyes softened, a flicker of relief passing through her gaze. "Then we have a chance." And in that moment, the human realized that, whatever the future held, there was no going back. He had made his choice, and his journey had only just begun. The engagement ceremony. The human had barely processed the gravity of his decision when the princess's words took on a new urgency. "We must prepare," she said, her voice steady, but tinged with an emotion he couldn't quite place. She turned and gestured for him to follow her down the sleek corridors of her ship. He didn't question her. His legs moved almost mechanically as he trailed behind her. The ship hummed with life, its walls pulsating with soft, glowing light. It felt like walking inside a living entity, as though every part of the vessel was somehow aware of the momentous event that was unfolding. The human's mind spun. The enormity of what he had agreed to hit him in waves. This wasn't just about saving a planet. This wasn't just about marriage. It was about something far more intricate, far more complicated than he could ever imagine. As they walked, the princess didn't speak much. Her silence was more powerful than any words could have been. He could feel her anticipation, her confidence, almost as if she had already seen this day in her mind long before he had ever agreed. And then, when they reached a grand chamber at the heart of the ship, the reality of the situation fully sank in. The room was vast, illuminated by a mesmerizing blend of colors that seemed to shimmer like the stars. It felt like an ethereal ballroom. But there was an unmistakable solemnity to it. The air was thick with the weight of tradition, a ritual that had been followed for centuries. And yet, here he was, an outsider, thrust into the heart of it. The princess stepped forward, her regal presence casting a spell over the room. She was the center of it all, and for a moment, the human felt small, insignificant, as though he were a mere spectator to something much greater than himself. She turned to him, her eyes filled with resolve. "This is not just a ceremony. It is the binding of fates. It is the beginning of something beyond the comprehension of our minds. You must understand this." The human swallowed hard. The reality of what was about to happen was overwhelming. He wasn't just marrying a stranger. He wasn't just joining an alien world to his own. This was something ancient, something far bigger than either of them. But he couldn't turn back now. The decision was made. And as he glanced around the room, he could see the solemn faces of the princess's attendants, all standing at attention, ready for the ceremony to begin. As the first notes of a haunting, alien melody echoed through the room, a wave of emotion washed over the human. He wasn't prepared for this. How could anyone be? The princess stepped forward, her hand outstretched to him. He took it without thinking, almost instinctively. The moment their fingers touched, he felt a strange pull, as if something deep within him had just awoken. "Do not be afraid," the princess said softly. "This is the way it must be. Trust in what is to come." The human opened his mouth to speak, to protest, but no words came. He had agreed to this marriage, yes, but now that the moment had arrived, he was suffocated by doubt, by fear. What if this wasn't the right thing to do? What if he failed? What if he was not the man she needed him to be? But before he could voice his concerns, the ceremony began in earnest. The room seemed to pulse with energy, and the princess's attendants began to chant in a language the human couldn't understand. Each word seemed to resonate within the very walls of the chamber, vibrating through his chest. The air crackled with power, and he could feel the energy building in the room, swirling around them like a storm just waiting to be unleashed. Then the princess raised her other hand, and before the human could react, a blinding light enveloped them both. The room disappeared in a flash, and in that moment, the human felt something shift inside him. It was as though the entire universe had bent around them, aligning their fates into a single thread that tied them together. The light pulsed, then faded, leaving behind a strange, almost tangible sensation in the air. When the light faded and the world returned to normal, the human felt different. A connection had formed, something undeniable, something powerful. He looked at the princess, and for the first time since this strange journey had begun, he saw her as more than just an alien. She was no longer a distant royalty. She was his partner, his counterpart. Their bond had been forged. He glanced down at the ring that had appeared on his finger during the ceremony, an intricate design of silver and light. It seemed to hum with energy, just like the crystal he had seen earlier. The human felt the weight of the ring, its significance heavier than any object he had ever worn. "This is the first step," the princess said, her voice soft yet full of determination. "The bond is formed. Now, the true work begins." The human nodded, still trying to grasp the enormity of the ceremony, of what had just happened. The princess's eyes glowed faintly as she smiled, her confidence now matched by the faintest hint of warmth. "The world will change, human. And you, together with me, will lead us to that change." As the ceremony ended and the room quieted, the human felt a strange sense of peace. This was no longer about fear or confusion. It was no longer about running from the unknown. It was about accepting the responsibility that came with this choice. He had crossed a threshold, and now there was no turning back. For better or worse, he was part of something much greater than himself. And this was just the beginning. The plan to save both worlds. The silence in the chamber was thick, like the calm before a storm. The engagement ceremony had ended, but the weight of what had just transpired still hung in the air. The human stood beside the princess, feeling an unfamiliar sense of power and responsibility stirring deep inside him. The ring on his finger, glowing faintly, pulsed with energy, reminding him of the bond they had just formed. This was no longer just about marriage or duty. It was about something far larger, something more urgent. The princess led him out of the ceremony hall and into a secluded part of the ship. This was a place he hadn't seen before, quiet, almost hidden from the rest of the crew. The walls were lined with intricate alien symbols, glowing softly, and the room was filled with a faint humming noise, as though the ship itself was alive and watching. In the center of the room stood a large console, its surface covered in shimmering, unknown technology. The princess turned to him, her expression serious, almost grave. "Now that the bond is formed, we can move forward. But you must understand the magnitude of what we are about to do. You are not chosen by chance. You are the key to saving both our worlds." The human nodded, still grappling with the reality of the situation. His thoughts were spinning. "I understand that, but how exactly do we do this? How does my being here, your being here, make a difference? What's the next step?" The princess took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing, as if gathering her thoughts. "The Heartstone, the crystal you saw in the chamber, is the key to stabilizing my planet's sun. But its power is dormant, waiting for the right catalyst to awaken it. That catalyst is the union between you and me. But the Heartstone is only one piece of the puzzle." The human frowned. "A piece of the puzzle. What's the rest of it?" She stepped forward, pressing a button on the console. The walls around them began to shift, revealing a star map, a complex grid of glowing pathways and star systems. "The rest of it is in the stars," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "My people have tried everything. We've used all our technology to stabilize our sun, to no avail. We've even explored ancient rituals, seeking a way to save ourselves. But none of it worked, until now." The map flickered with the image of a dying sun, its light flickering weakly, surrounded by darkened planets and shattered debris. "Our star is collapsing. Its energy is unstable, and the radiation is destroying everything in its path. My people are dying, and we have no time left." The human stared at the map, the weight of her words sinking in. He could feel the urgency building inside him. He had thought he was just part of some strange marriage arrangement, but now he understood. This wasn't just about their bond. It was about saving entire worlds from annihilation. "How does this map fit into the plan?" he asked, his voice low but steady. The princess pointed to a distant system on the map, a cluster of stars swirling in a chaotic formation. This system holds the secret. The Heartstone needs to be connected to a specific energy field, one that exists only in the core of a nearby star. When the bond between us is fully activated, the Heartstone will tap into that energy, sending a powerful pulse that will stabilize both the Koran sun and our planet's environment. The human was silent for a moment, processing the information. So, if we do this, if the Heartstone works, it'll save your world. And the energy will also fix the damage to your sun. Exactly, she replied, her voice firm. But there's more. The energy required to activate the Heartstone is immense. It will take everything we have, our combined strength, our bond, our faith in the mission. If we succeed, the Koran star will stabilize, and life will return to normal. But if we fail, her voice trailed off. But the meaning was clear. Failure meant destruction, not just for her planet, but for everything. The human felt the weight of her words pressing on him once more. This was no longer a decision between him and the princess. This was about survival. This was about risking everything to save not one world, but two. But how do we even begin this process? He asked, the doubt creeping into his voice. How do we activate the energy in the first place? We're not scientists. We are more than that now. The princess interrupted, her gaze intense. This bond between us is not just a connection of hearts. It's a union of purpose, of destiny. You have the power to activate the Heartstone. Together, we will enter the heart of the storm and channel that energy. But you must trust me, human. You must trust that this is the only way. Her words hit him like a force. And he knew, deep down, that she was right. He was no longer just a man caught in a strange situation. He was part of something much larger. The pressure was immense, but in that moment, he also realized something else. He had the power to change the future, to save not only a planet, but the lives of countless beings. His life would never be the same, no matter what happened next. Okay, he said, his voice firm now, with a newfound resolve. I'll do it. I'll help you. Whatever it takes. The princess's expression softened, but there was still an undeniable strength in her eyes. We are a team now. Together, we will save Koran. Together, we will change the course of history. As the map flickered one last time, showing the path they would take, the human felt a strange surge of energy within himself. It was as if the universe was aligning around him, urging him forward. He wasn't just following someone else's mission anymore. He was creating his own destiny. And no matter how dangerous, no matter how impossible it seemed, he knew there was no turning back. The plan had begun, and everything would change from this moment forward. The ultimate choice and resolution. The room pulsed with the energy of the Heartstone, its light flickering like the heartbeat of a dying star. The human stood at the center of the chamber, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Beside him, the princess stood tall and unwavering, her presence as strong as ever. Her eyes locked with his, and for a moment, he could feel the deep, silent understanding between them. They were in this together now. Whatever it took, they had no choice but to succeed. The human glanced down at the glowing ring on his finger, the symbol of the bond that had been formed between them. It felt like a living thing, thrumming with energy. He could almost feel the power of Koran's sun, dying and desperate, calling out for salvation. The fate of two worlds rested on their shoulders, and the pressure felt almost suffocating. Could he really do this? Could they really pull off the impossible? We don't have much time, the princess said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. The pulse needs to be activated before the star reaches its critical point. If we wait too long, the radiation will be unstoppable. Our worlds will be lost. The human nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He wasn't prepared for this. There was no manual for how to save an entire planet, or two. He was just a man, a simple man, thrust into this monumental mission. But he wasn't the same person he had been when he first boarded the ship. The bond with the princess had changed him, awakened something inside that he couldn't explain. It was a force stronger than anything he had ever known, an undeniable pull toward something greater than himself. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice calm yet filled with an urgency that mirrored his own. He didn't respond at first. The truth was, he wasn't sure if he was ready. He had no way of knowing whether this would work, whether they would succeed or fail. But one thing was certain: this was the only chance they had. "Let's do it," he said finally, his voice steady but resolute. The princess took a step forward, her hand reaching out toward the heartstone. He mirrored her movements, their hands coming together to form a union of energy and purpose. The moment their fingers touched the crystal, the air around them seemed to vibrate with a surge of power. A wave of energy rushed through the human's body, filling him with a strange, electrifying sensation. It was as if every cell in his body was being awakened, his very DNA reacting to the power he was now channeling. The princess's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, the world around them faded away. There was no ship, no stars, no planet, only the two of them, and the energy coursing between them. It was a connection like nothing he had ever felt before, a perfect synchronization of will and purpose. They were no longer two separate beings. They were one force, moving together as if guided by the universe itself. "I trust you," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet strength that made his heart swell. And with that, they began the activation. The heartstone flared to life, its energy spiraling outward in brilliant tendrils of light. The human's vision blurred as the energy coursed through him, through her, through everything. He could feel the weight of the stars in his chest, the immense power of the sun on the verge of collapse. Time seemed to stretch and bend, and for a brief moment, he was no longer sure of where he ended, and the princess began. They were two beings, yes, but their bond made them something greater, something unstoppable. A massive surge of energy erupted from the heartstone, and the room was filled with blinding light. The walls seemed to ripple with the intensity of the pulse, the force of it rattling everything around them. The human's heart raced, the energy flowing through him in waves, until it reached a peak. And then, silence. The light dimmed, and the energy settled, leaving the room vibrating with the aftereffects. The human stood there, breathless, his body trembling with the power that had just coursed through him. His eyes met the princess's, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. Then, slowly, the star map flickered to life on the console in front of them. The dying sun of Corin was still there, but something had changed. The radiation, which had once been a glowing, unstable mass, was now pulsing steadily, its light growing stronger with each passing second. The star wasn't just stable, it was healing. The damage was reversing. Slowly but surely, the power of the heartstone pulsing through the star, restoring it to life. "We did it," the human said, his voice hoarse, but filled with awe. He couldn't believe it. It was working. The princess's face softened, a look of relief flooding her features. "Yes, we did," she replied, her voice quiet but full of gratitude. "We've saved my people. We've saved both our worlds." The human stood there, trying to comprehend what had just happened. They had done the impossible. The bond between them, born of fate and necessity, had unlocked a power greater than anything they could have imagined. And in doing so, they had not only saved the planet, but had forever changed the course of their own destinies. But it wasn't just the planets that had been saved. The human realized something deeper as he looked at the princess beside him. He had been saved too. He was no longer the man he had been when he first boarded this ship. He had found purpose, strength, and courage he never knew he had. He had found a future. And as they stood there, the light of the restored sun shining through the ship's windows, the human understood something else. This was only the beginning. They had created a new world together, a world where anything was possible. As he looked at the princess, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. And with that, He took a step forward, knowing that this was just the first chapter in the epic story of their lives.